We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. Find the podcast at bookedonrock.com. You can find every episode of Booked on Rock there, along with links to your favorite listening platforms, exclusive videos, blogs, links to all of the social media sites, and find out the latest rock book releases there. Ben Apatoff is a returning guest. His latest book, Body Count's Body Count, is part of the 33 1/3 series. It's an exploration and look back at the 1992 self-titled debut album from Ice-T's heavy metal band, Body Count. To hear Body Count's self-titled debut album, head over to the show notes page. Hey, Ben, welcome back to the podcast. Good to see you again.
Thanks. Great to see you too.
I had you here for your Metallica book, which was, we were talking before we recorded about, I don't know, year and a half ago?
About a year and a half ago, because the book was August 2021, so I was doing my press after that.
Yep. So it's great to have you back on. And this time around, this is a band that I really didn't know a whole lot about. And I have to admit, when the album came out in 91, right? 91, 92.
First tour is 91, album is 92. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was still about 3-4 years away from getting into rap and hip hop. And I became a fan of Tupac and Biggie and Ice Cube and NWA. But at the time, I still was resistant to this idea of rap and rock together. I wasn't ready to embrace it, so I just let it pass me by. And all these years later, your book comes out. Now I'm preparing and I read the book, and as I'm reading it, I got the album playing, and I was like, how did I miss this? This is good shit. Yeah. So I'm it's so great to have you on just to talk about this. Let's start with when you discovered this album. You got it when it came out?
I got it a little after it came out. It was the late 90s. I was in high school and another kid played it for me in the school library. And he was like, I was into like punk and metal. I just gotten into like the Misfits and bands like that. And another kid was like, you will not believe this band. This is Ice-T, it's Body Count. And the first song I heard was KKK Bitch. And I was like, what is this? It's just like, it's funny, it's scary, it's catchy, and it felt very punk rock to me. This was like my sort of, I was having my like Metallica and Guns N' Roses wave, and then like my sort of Dead Kennedys Black Flag wave, and this was like part of that. And as I was mentioning, I was not I had also never bought any rap, so this was my first time hearing sort of inner city stories that Ice-T has. He's sort of a definitive rapper and also very unique. So that was, as both sort of hearing that stuff for the first time, but also in the very unique way that he is as a lyricist and MC. It was also the version I heard was the censored version. It did not have Cop Killer on it. So, and there was not a lot about that story at the time. There wasn't a lot about them online or in magazines. So it felt like kind of a mystery to me. And I read on, I think on allmusic.com, like they had a song that got taken off, but I did not realize how big that story had gotten. So, but I thought of it as like a cool punk rock record. Not a lot of people at my school had heard of it, and it was kind of like, I kind of thought of him as like a Henry Rollins type, I'd say.
Yeah, he was an established rapper at that time, right?
An established rapper. You're actually talking about the crossover. He went on the first Lollapalooza tour as a rapper, as the only rapper on the tour, and he kind of brought his high school friends on as a way to sort of like help them out, but also to like show his rock chops. And he would kind of play his rap set and then halfway through tell the crowd, all right, just watch this, and bring out the Body Count guys and do this kind of explosive set of metal and punk songs. And
that's what I was going to ask you about. What's the origins of Body Count? Ice-T, he didn't intend to be the front man either.
That's true. That was not part of the plan. He knew all those guys in high school. Ice-T, his parents both passed away when he was very young. He got moved off to live with his aunt in California. He went to a high school in South Central. He met all the Body Count guys. Also, Ice-T grows up in the 1970s. He does not have a rap influence there, right? I mean, this is before like Run DMC and the Sugar Hill Gang, so he can't be like, those are my influences. So he's got a cousin who he has to share a room with who is really into 70s classic rock radio. So he grows up on like Blue Oyster Cult and Black Sabbath and bands like that. He loves Parliament Funkadelic. He He loves the kind of spoken word jazzy guys like Gil Scott Heron and Iceberg Slim, and he befriends his kind of rock players in high school. So that's Ernie, that's Beatmaster V, that's those guys who ended up in Body Count. And I guess one consistent thing that comes up again and again with the Body Count, with the Ice-T story overall, is many people will be like, Ice never forgets his friends, never forgets his boyhood friends. They're like, and then people get teary-eyed talking about, like, he gives his old buddies jobs, in music and in TV and in his home, working in his garage and things like that. And yeah, he's kind of stayed in touch with his friends like Ernie and with Mooseman and people like that, and kind of gave him a hand. He started showing up on some songs and started trying to pass them on to his record label people. And then they're like, yeah, you can do both this and Body Count, and yeah, he kind of hustled them through that way to Warner Brothers.
Yeah, and I mentioned he did establish himself by that time as a rapper, one of the biggest, because he had singles like Colors. He had, I remember, New Jack Hustler. That was just prior to Body Count, or maybe around the same time that came out. So he definitely was legit. He was among the biggest of the rap artists at that time. And here he comes out with Body Count. So what's the story behind the name Body Count? Because you mentioned this in the book. It's actually got more than one meaning to it.
Yeah. One thing about Body Count, I think it's a brilliant band name. It's a little bit like the Sex Pistols or Hole, in that you can kind of project your ideas of violence or sex onto it, right? He's sort of, it's funny, when his first rap album comes out, Rhyme Pays, he has a parental advisory that's sort of tubular shape here. And an interviewer says, okay, so you've got this one that he sort of self-designed, right? He's like, I want people to know there's something forbidden here they can't hear. And he kind of plays with the censorship theme. He says, so okay, so you've got this tubular shape. Is that a bullet? Is it a condom? What is it? He's like, well, what do you project on that? That's, and he kind of likes to keep people guessing. So with Body Count, he says, well, there's the socially conscious term. There's, kids are getting killed in the inner city, and the newscasters treat it like a body count. They're like, 16 youth killed in gang homicides, now sports. That's a body count. He says, there's this sort of the body count of the mosh pit. He's a big mosh pit guy. He talks about, I love getting the crowd in a mosh pit. I love performing in front of that. That's the most exciting thing. He loves to crowd surf. He says, like, that's the body count. Like, you see the kids getting in the mosh pit, that's the body count. He says, we're backstage, we've got girls getting backstage, we've got a different kind of body count there. That's, he likes to be coy about that in interviews. So a few different things that he kind of, he likes to sort of keep people guessing with a name, and they can see body counts like, oh, is it a violence thing? Is that a sex thing? What is that? And he definitely invites that sort of mystery and curiosity with a band name.
You mentioned the song that wasn't on the album that you initially got. So let's get to that, because the book starts on July 28th, 1992. There's a news conference in Los Angeles at the, I think it's pronounced the Sofitel Hotel. Is that
right?
Yeah. Body Count by now had caused the music industry's biggest media storm. And you write, quote, other artists might have craved the notoriety or played it up for publicity, but at the Sofitel, Ice-T put a halt to it. Talk about the song that caused the media uproar and what he decides to do as a result, and how that specific decision was met with criticism from the fans and the media. It was like he was in a no-win situation.
Yeah, that song was called Cop Killer. It became a part of a big controversy, so that, he was playing it on Lollapalooza for about a year, and that's the last song on the record. Right after the record comes out, the Rodney King verdict comes in, LA breaks out in violence. There's a presidential election year. There are a lot of people focusing on, police brutality and issues and stuff like that. Rap is kind of like a big, scary buzzword. There's family values issues and stuff like that. And even though it's not a rap song, he gets kind of targeted. A teen girl brings the record home. Her father's a policeman in Texas, and he prints in the police newsletter, like, this is a major record. And the record has had sort of a cult success rate. It does about as well as you expect someone who is on that first Lollapalooza and collaborating with Henry Rollins to do. It's sort of like a cult thing, but it's not kind of Guns N' Roses numbers, right? So it gets in the hands of this policeman. He puts it in a newspaper. It gets passed on to another policeman who's in charge of a union in Texas, and it breaks out into a big nationwide discussion. The presidential candidates comment on it. The NewsHour shows comment on it. It's in the New York Times, CNN, MTV. There are death threats. There are bomb threats. There's a lot going on. And Ice-T takes the song off the record. He throws a press conference. He shocks people. I note in the book that he probably does the thing that would offend the most people, right? His fans are unhappy about it. They think he chickened out. His supporters, the people, the rappers think that this is going to be the end of hip hop because there's going to be more censorship. The police are not happy about it because they think that there should be a bigger apology. So he basically offends the most people when he takes the song off the record. And on that note, I think that the book shows you he's a little bit like, I think I'm a little bit like the Paul Newman character Cool Hand Luke, right? Where people like him because he's a rebel. And then they're disappointed when he seems to cave in, right? When he seems to compromise his transgressive behavior. But then his compromises turn out to be even more rebellious than initially seen. Just a few days after that, he's on the cover of Rolling Stone. He's wearing a policeman's uniform, and people are furious at him. He could have been giving the finger; it would have been less offensive. It's more offensive that he's doing that. And he takes the song off the record, and that gets more attention paid to it. The sales go up. It becomes this kind of legendary status that the song that actually got taken off the record. And yeah, he gets a lot of bad press, and a lot of people are upset with him for taking it off initially. But and he gets, this didn't go in the book. I saw there was something like Hustler magazine called him like the Pussy of the Year or something like that. He had sort of a there was
Wow.
this sort of, yeah, exactly, right. And there was this big he said something about him, and Chuck D had an interview where they talked about it and said something like, look, people who are not in the war shouldn't comment on it, right? You don't know what it's like to get those death threats. You don't know what it's like to have the people you care about threatened. Someone at the Source magazine was like, isn't that some kind of juice, some kind of status? And Ice-T's like, yeah, the kind that will get you killed. He brought more attention to it by one thing I'll add to that is I did not get permission for this, but I initially wanted the book to have an epigraph from the artist Basquiat, who said, I cross out words so you see them more. Right. So you pay more attention to the things that are crossed. Like, what's he hiding there? What did he change? What did he get out of that? And I think that by taking the song off the record, initially, it looks like he lost the battle, but in the long run, people pay more attention to that song. And that's the one.
Yeah, it seemed like Ice-T was playing a little chess game there.
Yeah. I think he was thinking about the long run with that. Kind of like Cool Hand Luke. He sort of does a compromise that people think is a sellout, or chickening out. And then in the long run, he becomes an even bigger rebellious figure than he was at the time.
And the album was going to be called Cop Killer. Why did you decide to change it?
There's somebody at Warner who was a very loyal guy for the team. There were so many things I had to take out because the third books are short, but he was actually the guy who brought Prince to Warner Brothers. He was a big deal there. And his father was a policeman, and he expressed some mild concerns about the last song on the album, which is called Cop Killer. And Ice-T at the time, very, very, very popular at Warner Brothers. He's got incredible business skills, incredible people skills. All the upper CEO types love him. He makes them feel cool. He's making them a lot of money. And he says, all right, we'll just call the album Body Count. We'll not take the song off. And, in interviews, he says, everyone knows what the album's really called. And he says something that's like the art of being hardcore. You have to make some changes and still get your own way. And yeah, I think that was worth it to him to do that.
One thing that stood out in the chapter that goes into Ice-T's history is the fact that Bob Dylan had become a fan of him back in the late 80s, early 90s. Although maybe not, if you look at it from a different perspective, from an artist perspective, maybe it does make sense. But he told producer Daniel Lanois that Ice-T and Public Enemy, quote, laid down the tracks. He said they were all poets and they knew what was going on. Part of me was surprised, like I said, but part of me not so surprised, because if you look at it from an artist's perspective, Bob Dylan would appreciate that honesty in the lyrics and the fact that he's honest about what he sees around him and he's putting into the music. So I guess from that perspective, not surprising. But what was your reaction to reading that? I kind of had the same thing where I actually forgotten about that part of Bob Dylan's book until fairly recently. But I remember reading at the time at first being like, oh, that's a surprise. And then thinking about it from another moment, I guess it makes sense that he'd like Ice-T and Public Enemy and people like that. Ice-T has a part in one of his books where he writes about Seymour Stein signing him to the record label and saying you sound like Bob Dylan to me. And Ice-T says, well, if you think about it, Subterranean Homesick Blues is a great rap song, right? And that's the 1960s. So I can definitely see how they're kindred spirits. They also both named themselves after poets that they liked. Bob Dylan after Dylan Thomas, Ice-T after Iceberg Slim. Getting over the initial shock of really, he likes that. I can definitely oh yeah, that's that totally makes sense that he'd like Ice-T. Talk about Ice-T's approach to dealing with censorship and conservative label decisions in terms of willing to compromise. This is kind of similar to his his decision to pull Cop Killers off, he didn't mind compromising, or as he said it, quote, seem like he's compromising in order to still get his way. Smart approach, you think, or would you rather see an artist just say, take it or leave it?
Well, he's an interesting guy. He plays a lot with, especially leading up to the cop killer battle, he likes to play a lot with censorship. He's a big debater, kind of like Frank Zappa, or Jello Biafra. He debates the PMRC about censorship in music. He likes to talk about the sheriff's department keeps them from playing some shows on the Sunset Strip in LA, and he likes to talk about that in interviews. Like, we got censored, that's cool, right? Or There Goes the Neighborhood videos coming out. He says, we want something that like pushes the edge. Like, you want to censor, but you can't censor, right? And the comic book series that he's inking a deal with is called Buy It Until It's, the tagline is Buy It Before It's Banned. He kind of likes to play with that idea, but he knows that edge that he can sell. He also, I think, navigates that for his success. One of the things he opened up to me about when I talked to him was, I said something kind of like what you asked. I said, so Ice, you're a famously uncompromising artist. Why is it now with the early 90s with Original Gangster, with Body Count, that you come up with like the radio edits for the songs? Like There Goes the Neighborhood has lyrics changed for TV. And he said, early on in my career, my thought was, look, I'm an artist. I'm an album guy. I'm not a singles guy. I'm not a radio guy. Don't change my lyrics, right? Don't censor my words. And he said, and then I saw that NWA and people like that would reach a wider audience by coming up with the edited versions, and that nobody thought any less of them. Nobody was like, oh, they did the edits version, they sold out, right? And it's like, you know what? I kind of shot myself in the foot. He's like, I hate doing it. I still don't like, to this day, they're like, can you come out with a radio edit? I'm like, I don't want to. But he said, but yeah, I realized that I was just being stubborn in that regard.
Yeah, it would have opened the door.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The clean version.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Let's get into the album. It starts off with The Sound of Rain, which is your first thought is Black Sabbath, the debut. Yes. But yeah, then we hear a spoken word track titled Smoked Pork, a funny and fatal exchange with a policeman. 6 spoken word tracks in all on this album, which are interesting. Smoked Pork segs into body counts in the house. And you write, quote, when body counts in the house, it's both a party and a home invasion, depending on the listener. So I want to ask you about guitarist Ernie C here, because he also co-produced the album with Ice-T. What a riff and a solo on this track. His instrumental on the album, C Note, is beautiful. What is his backstory? He's from Compton, right?
Ernie is great. He grew up in the Detroit area, and they moved out to Los Angeles with his single father. Went to Crenshaw High School where he met the Body Count guys. Ernie is a great guitar player. He's got also a big classic rock influence. He likes the Shredders. He likes he's going to see Van Halen in clubs. He told me some good Eddie stories. I didn't get to include all of them in the book, which I'll have to share with you.
Oh, yeah, you got to share those with me.
Yeah, so he's a great guitarist. He plays in school. He loves Led Zeppelin. He's sneaking in to watch The Song Remains the Same. He and Ice work very well together. He says that some guitar records are just like, the guitarist going crazy and Ice can be like, okay, like, slow it down, make a riff. They have, this is a cliche, I know, but they do have kind of I'd say they have kind of a Mick and Keith relationship where they share songwriting duties. They've known each other since they were kids. They know each other very well. They've got both sort of like rock star musical chops together. Another thing I'll say about Ernie too is that everybody told me leading up to my conversation with Ernie, like, you're going to love Ernie. He's so nice. He's so cool. He's so sweet. And they're absolutely right. He is the nicest man. He gets back to you quickly. He puts you in touch with people. He is so thoughtful and nice and, just like a good guy in rock. And I cannot think of a better person to write a book with. That said, with all that being true, Ernie and Ice are the bosses. And I think that when you read profiles of the sort of like nice guys of rock music, like Bruce, like Dave Grohl, like Eddie Van Halen, you often see that they're the nice guy and not enough about them being that boss. And I wanted to make it clear that, Ernie's the nicest guy, but he hustles, he gets people to show up to rehearsal, he gives out report cards on how they did, he fires people when he has to, and he definitely is like a very focused, driven writer and musician. So he's absolutely just a totally sweet human being. And so many people have great stories about how much they love Ernie, but he's also, he said something to me along the lines of, people think as I'm laid back, I'm a pushover, and he's not. He's a great dude who's also like very driven.
Yeah, that's awesome. He's got a new fan here. He's,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I'm a new fan. Ben Apatoff is our guest. His new book, Body Counts, part of the 33 1/3 series. And we should throw in a free plug, the Metallica book we were mentioning, the $24.95 book.
Thank
right?
you. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
yeah. The title track to Body Count, you can hear a Zeppelin Stairway to Heaven influence there in Ernie C's intro. And as you said, a huge Zeppelin fan. The main riff, it's like an old Chuck Berry lick, according to Ernie. I think he told you that, right? So I'm interested in your thoughts on this song, since this may be my personal favorite track from the album. It's punk, it's metal, it's rap, it's protest song. It's got a drum solo from Beatmaster V, which is like jazzy, a guitar solo, a cool bass section at the start from Mooseman, right?
Yes, right. Yeah.
And it all works, which is not easy to do.
It's remarkable, and it sounds so simple. I mean, it sounds like kind of like an old Chuck Berry riff, kind of like the Back to Basics rock. It sounds a little punk, a little metal, but when you actually like dissect the song, there's so much going on, and it's super catchy. And he said, it's supposed to fade out at that kind of like guitar breakdown, and then like it got rewound at the wrong part. We're like, oh, just let's keep that in there. It's such a powerful song. That's the song they opened with at Lollapalooza. So Ice-T has done his rap set for about 20 minutes, and he's like, watch this, and then they go into the song Body Count. It also has kind of a Sabbath nod. Starts with the rain. They've got the Black Sabbath song on the Black Sabbath album by Black Sabbath. They've got the Body Count song on the Body Count album by Body Count. It's also debuted on Ice-T's rap album, OG Original Gangster, the previous year. And I got a quote from Danko Jones saying, like, I rewound that again and again. Like, can you imagine, like, that exists? Like, there's that band there in this deep cut track 18 on this hip hop record. Like, there's nothing else like that in the world. And but yeah, it's such a powerful song, and it's catchy and it's smart, and I love that song.
What were the crowds like at the concerts? Because you had metal fans, rap fans, and this is in the early 90s. This isn't like nowadays, it's more accepted.
Yeah, a few people said that. They said, like, I'd never seen that much diversity of a crowd except for at the Body Count shows. And a few other people said things like, like some of the guys who are currently Body Count were like, I used to be the only black guy at the metal show, and like now that's more diverse. Or like, people would say, I used to be, the hip hop shows are not very diverse, and now they're a lot more diverse. And I think they definitely broke down that barrier for a lot of people. I mean, one of their engineers said, I had not seen that kind of mix of a show since the 1960s, reggae shows in England. I mean, it was just real barrier breaking show for the audience.
One track that I'm surprised wasn't a hit, but then reading the book, I can see why, The Winner Loses. And that's a departure from anything that Ice-T did before that, I would think. Melodic, it's got a hook, it's got harmonies, it's partly acoustic. I mean, it's a power ballad. I mean, it's right. I mean, it had a video to go with it. Lyric is anti-drug, so I would think it would have been a pretty significant signal, but you say it was overshadowed by the controversy that the rest of the album had, specifically Cop Killer. So that kind of killed the momentum.
Yeah, that song sounds like a hit to me for sure. There are other songs like they feel like a very uncompromising band to me. I can see why it's not like, it doesn't have a sort of like Black Album or Use Your Illusion success, but it's commercial success, that is. But yeah, The Winner Loses does sound like a power ballad hit. And I think that even when the Cop Killer controversy starts, some of the people in Warner Brothers try to defend the band by being like, no, they've got the Winner Losers. They've got positive messages on the record. And I think that people weren't ready. They're taking lyrics out of context, they're taking songs out of context, and people weren't ready to accept them as a band that has that kind of messages in their songs. That's an old song too. That was written by Ernie before Ice was the frontman of the band too. So that one goes back a long time. And Ernie told me that the guy he wrote it about is actually still alive and got clean. He was concerned about a friend of his.
Oh, wow.
Who dies in the song. And then he said, but you know what? Things worked out there. So so that's good. But, they get sort of pigeonholed as bad guys and tough guys. And that's definitely something that, rock stars market themselves as. But there are a lot of positive messages on that album. That's one of them.
The Booked on Rock podcast will be back after this.
I take the Wayfarers off and hand them to him. Maybe I really did kill a Solly. Though I'm positive that any cab drivers I've killed lately were not American. I probably did. There probably is a wanted poster of me at... where the taxi, the place where all the taxis congregate. What's it called? The driver tries the sunglasses on, looks at himself in the rearview mirror, and then takes them off. He folds the glasses and puts them in his jacket pocket. You're a dead man, I smile grimly at him. And you're a yuppie scumbag, he says. You're a dead man, Abdullah. I repeat, no joke. Count on it. Yeah? And you're a yuppie scumbag, which is worse. He starts the cab up and pulls away from me. While walking back to the highway, I stop, choke back a sob, my throat tightens. I just want to... Facing the skyline through all the baby talk, I murmur, keep the game going. As I stand, frozen in position, an old woman emerges behind a 3-penny opera poster at a deserted bus stop, and she's homeless and begging, hobbling over, her face covered with sores that look like bugs, holding out a shaking red hand. Oh, will you please go away, I sigh. She tells me to get a haircut. Oh, hi there. You caught me reading a hateful story. How bigoted of you. Actually, that was a section from American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis, a book that has been very controversial since before its publication, being rejected by publishers all over the world, and demonized by many who have never even read it, and are therefore unable to see it as the black comedy and poignant satire that it is. Here at Screaming Eye Press, we are committed to freedom of expression in all its forms. This is why we have created Horrible Little Stories. Stories they don't want you to read. A collection of horror and dark fantasy stories by Joe Lansdale, Gary Reiser, Elizabeth Massey, Jack Dan, Richard Christian Matheson, G. Wayne Miller, Ray Garton, A.J. Lance, and more. All proceeds will be donated to the anti-censorship organization, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, or the FIRE, found at thefire.org. What is freedom of expression? Without the freedom to offend, it ceases to exist. Salman Rushdie. And if we've offended you with this commercial, then just turn it off for fuck's sake.
The single, There Goes the Neighborhood. The lyrics, don't they know rock's just for whites? Don't they know the rules? The 3-finger tapping segment, inspired by Eddie Van Halen. And you write about a song like this in KKK, Bitch, and how it took things even further than rap rock crossovers before, like Walk This Way with Aerosmith and Run DMC, or Bring the Noise with Anthrax and Public Enemy. Expand on that a little bit, and how do you think a song like There Goes the Neighborhood is viewed today, 30 years later?
First off, those songs were not collaborations, right? They were not, it wasn't Public Enemy teaming up with Anthrax, or, that was an actual band. And they're also not rap rock. Those are rock songs sung by a guy whose usual career is rap. And they get stereotyped as rap because of who Ice-T is and because of the subject matter of the songs. But they're like hard rock songs or punk songs or metal songs. And one thing that Ice-T points out, and he's not the first person to make this, but he, is expressive about it, is that Black rock artists are often categorized as R&B or funk or rap rock or something like that, and not given credit for their rock chops. Prince has a lot of rock chops. Parliament Funkadelic, Sly and the Family Stone, and Viscount are a serious, straight ahead rock, punk, and metal band. I mean, the word he uses the most is hardcore. He says, sometimes it's punk, sometimes it's metal, it's always hardcore, and they're definitely that on songs like KKK Bitch and There Goes the Neighborhood. There Goes the Neighborhood is a fascinating song because it's a thing that gets discussed a lot more now. People talk about the Great Replacement theory and how it plays in modern politics. And I looked it up. That didn't even have a name until about 20 years after There Goes the Neighborhood, that kind of fear of, the other moving in, right? And whether it's moving into rock music, whether it's moving into the neighborhood, and what Ice-T said about there's this kind of fear, like where these guys come from, what are they doing in our neighborhood, that's not for them, that's for us, and what they're coming into our music, that's not for them, that's for us. And I remember my dad talking to me I'm not going to pretend to be especially smart about this, but my dad talked to me a while ago about some article about the Great Replacement theory, and I was like, wait, what's that? That's There Goes the Neighborhood. And I started writing something about that for the book, and then I started to realize it was so well known at this point that I didn't feel the need to explain it, right? I wasn't like, I'm not just saying this to get people to read the book, but Body Count fans are smart, 33 and a Third fans are, the readers are smart, and I don't think they need me to be like, this is the Great Replacement theory. But you see that sort of fear of other races coming into the neighborhood, and the things that people say on sites like that. There are definitely a few examples I didn't put into the book because I didn't want to give them much ground, but there are definitely examples of people talking about race in the United States and music where I'm just like, There Goes the Neighborhood. That's that fear.
Yeah. Well, Ernie C was mentioning that in high school. He was kind of an outcast because a lot of the kids in his school were listening to, I can't remember what they were listening to at that time. It would have been more like funk or R&B
Yeah.
or whatever. But he was listening to Zeppelin and Sabbath and
Yeah,
yeah.
he got some tapes from a friend, and he has so many stories, and it killed me to not, they had to kind of make it about body count, not like, he sat in with people from the Coasters and War and Donny Hathaway and people like that at a little venue he was playing at growing up, and he honed his guitar chops that way, and I think he's gone a long way into fitting in. I read a little in the book about how there's the discussion about how all black rock bands are marginalized and how it's like a different thing and stuff like that. But in like the discussions about the great black rock bands and books about them and in shows about them, body count is often left out, right? And the focus will tend to be on Living Color and Fishbone and Bad Brains, who are great, but body count is often left out of the conversation. And I think that they still kind of feel in some ways like the marginalized among the marginalized, like the left out among the left out.
Yeah, I think this book will help to
I
bring
hope
more
so.
attention to him. Tell me about what are these Eddie stories that Ernie told you? Do you remember?
He had some good stories. I mean, he saw him when he was young. He kept saying, like, I couldn't tell what he was doing, but I saw him play and stuff. He got a voicemail message from Eddie Van Halen once. He said, I left that on my outgoing mailbox for months and months, just so people could know I talked to Eddie Van Halen on the phone. And he's a sweet guy. I know he told me about loving the first two records as two of his biggest influences. But he had a story in it. This was left out of the book, unfortunately. But he said that he's trying to get an Ernie Ball guitar. I'm going to give him a guitar, and he's having trouble getting that. And he talked to Eddie Van Halen about that, and he said, "They won't give you that guitar." And he said, "They gave John McEnroe one of those guitars. They're going to give you one. They give it to John McEnroe. They'll give it to you." So he made some calls, and Eddie Van Halen got Ernie the guitar, and so Ernie is just
Wow. What a story. Now, well,
Yeah.
Ernie, I'm thinking now with his age, he probably saw Van Halen like in their early days, maybe even the
Yeah.
club days, right? Was he?
Yeah, I forget the name of the club, but
Because he was, where was he from again? He's from the Oakland area or San Fran? He was from,
he's from like near Oakland, near like Compton and
yeah.
South
So
Side.
he wasn't far from where Eddie and and
Yeah,
the guys were playing there on the Sunset Strip. He
yeah,
could very well have seen him in one of those like the Whiskey a Go Go.
yeah. So he was seeing him in the early days, and yeah, he has stories about one of the magazine articles about Ernie called him the Kevin Bacon of metal because he just has connections with everybody, and he's got stories about Soundgarden and about Rob Zombie and about Sly Stone and about Jane's Addiction, and yeah, he's just a sweet guy who kind of connects with all these people and there's all these stories.
Hey, let's segue. This is a good segue. Whiskey a Go Go. There was a story that Ernie and Ice tell to Martha Quinn because they appeared on MTV
Right.
and they were there to, I guess, premiere or just talk about the video, There Goes the Neighborhood. And they described the video as, quote, one that you would want to ban but couldn't ban. Work that edge.
Yeah.
Ice turned a story about a canceled body count performance at the Whiskey a Go Go into some of the most enthralling punk notoriety since Bad Brains were banned in DC. That's from your book. What was the story? What was the story? They were banned from the Whiskey a Go Go.
Yeah, well, the way that Ice frames it is that his crowd was going to show up to the body count shows, and they didn't want, they were worried about police protection. There's still a lot of stigma about hip hop shows, a lot of stigma about Ice-T, a lot of stigma about the place overcrowding with Ice-T fans. I talked to one of the bookers of early Ice-T shows, Hot Rod Long, a really cool dude, and he told me that they set a police bond for the whiskey show. They're like, okay, like you need to pay all this money for police protection. And he came back to Ice, like, Ice, they need police protection. He said, yeah, I'll pay that. That's going to be the best. Those cops are going to watch me sing Cop Killer, and they're going to have to like it because I paid the protection. And Hot Rod came back to the manager with the money, and the manager said, no, you're not supposed to have the money, like, out. Like, and basically, would not let them play anywhere on the strip, which Ice-T then, Ice-T is a brilliant business and marketing guy, and he basically turned it into, we got banned, which is cool.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
That goes back to the early days of Chuck Berry, the Beatles, or whatever. It's like your parents don't want you to go see that band.
Exactly.
and of course, when you tell the kids not to do something, they're going to do it.
Exactly, right. And, he's and he plays with that. He says, that parental advisory, that's going to sell my records, right? He loves to play with that idea of kind of like kids getting the thing that their parents don't like, the thing that they're scared of, right?
So you talked about you did have to make sure that the book was a certain length, but I'm so glad that you were able to put in this section where I think Ernie and Ice talk about every track on the album. And they got these great stories. So if you're into the minutia, the stories behind the songs,
Yeah.
this chapter is great.
Thank you.
It's got all the songs. Let's kind of go through. Let's see. What should we pick? Like Body Count, Ernie says, quote, "The song wasn't originally written like that. We did all the parts, and at the end it went to that Hendrix slow vamp, and then he hums it. I'm playing that raised ninth chord that's kind of in the middle of it. That was going to be at the end, but the engineer rewound it too fast, and so he skipped over and put the parts in the wrong part. So after we listened to it, we're like, that sounds pretty good." And then Ice says, "I think that song encapsulates what the group is about still today. It's about black voices yelling at the top of their lungs about topics and don't give me no bullshit."
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But every track is covered here, man. Great stories they give you.
Thank you. Yeah, I really wanted that to happen in the book. And I remember, when I first did my first interview with Ice-T, I said, by the way, it doesn't have to be now, but I did this talk with Ernie, and I just want to know that, I can at some point do the kind of classic album thing where the guys talk about every song on the record. And that's, there's a kind of a stereotype that the Body Count record is more controversial and good. And, I did want to give it, because there's always that, the anniversary of the record where the people who made it line up and, talk about every song. And I wanted to do something special like that for this book. So, I got some good stories. I was kind of touched at how nonchalant they are about Cop Killer at this point. They're kind of like, well, we thought the other songs were going to be more controversial. We thought they'd be worried about Mama's Gotta Die Tonight and stuff like that. And also stuff like for Body Counts in the House, Ernie says that, and I did not hear this, even though I love both these songs. He said, well, that music was inspired by Godzilla by Blue Oyster Cult. And the way
that's that. Right? That I remember that part. Yeah.
Yeah. And he says, so the way their song goes, da da na na na, ours goes da da na na na, and we want that same kind of feel of like, something scary is coming, right? And it's already here, right? And Ice-T said, well, those lyrics to Body Counts in the House were inspired by Suicidal Tendencies' Pledge Your Allegiance, because I like the way that when you see them, the crowd do that, ST, ST, suicidal. And it's like, I want a song where they chant our name like that. And you kind of see that seamless blend of, punk and metal and hard rock, and how, they kind of fit those things naturally together with that sort of Suicidal Tendencies, with that sort of Blue Oyster Cult thing, and how they,
I love that.
The works of that song, right? Yeah.
Love that stuff, man. Cop Killer, Ice says, we wrote the song. Little did I know this guy would be some type of hero because people were so angry at police injustice. We actually thought Mama's Gotta Die Tonight would be the most controversial. So he didn't think it would be the most controversial song.
Yeah, I can see why they would think that would be more controversial. I guess the LA violence had not happened yet, so there was not as much media on police brutality, and there wasn't, it wasn't an election issue yet. But yeah, I kind of like how they were just kind of like, it was just a song that we wrote at the time, and not part early in the book, and he's told the story with other people too, but Ice-T says, it was just kind of inspired by Psycho Killer by Talking Heads, and it was like, Psycho Killer, and my drummer said, it'd be nice to have a Cop Killer song. Why is that? And like they started talking about that, and it's, it wasn't like they were trying to get banned. It wasn't like they were trying to get the bomb threats and the death threats. It was just kind of it was part of their repertoire. And Mama's Gotta Die Tonight. I loved hearing there were so many, for KKK bitch, so like some of those lyrics came from Blue Velvet, and for Mama's Gotta Die Tonight, Shawnee Sean, who's the hype man who also knew them in high school, said, we were watching serial killer movies like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, and just like we wanted kind of that storytelling thing like that. And Ice-T saying, I like the way when Henry Rollins would get intense and he'd start talking through the song and the Rollins band. I'm like, okay, picking up something with that. And they just have this myriad of influences that kind of come together in the song like that.
Man, that's like a VH1 Behind the Music chapter right there. That's gold. That's gold. Now, when I was listening to the album on Spotify, and then I'm reading the book, and then there's a part in your book where you mentioned that it wasn't available at some point. Mm-hmm. Recently it became available. Is that?
Well, the album is available. The original album with Cop Killer is still banned. You cannot get that. You can't stream that on Spotify. It's not on Apple Music or anything like that. You can find a legal upload that hasn't been taken down on YouTube. But one interesting thing about Body Count's success these days is that they're one of the only bands where the internet kind of leveled the playing field for them, right? Because, when I was a kid getting that Body Count record that did not have Cop Killer on it, I kind of figured I'd never hear it, right? It kind of got squashed out of existence by the controversy, and they pulled that record from the stores. They weren't making any more, and that was it, right? There wasn't illegal downloading yet. There wasn't a good way to hear it, and now it's more available. It's available on YouTube and things like that. But yeah, they replaced the record with another one which had this song "Freedom of Speech" with Jello Biafra. It was a song that he'd done on one of his records, "The Iceberg" with Jello, and then they made a new version for this record with a Jimi Hendrix sample of Foxy Lady underneath it, and that kind of took the place of Cop Killer. But yeah, you still can't stream the original Cop Killer song.
Okay. So yeah, because I did there's a link in the show notes page. So if people want to listen to the album, at least that's, it's the one that I saw on Spotify, which I think is it's like a deluxe edition or something.
Yeah, it's the edition that does not have, so it doesn't have Cop Killer. It's got freedom of speech. They also, against the artist's consent, they changed the album cover. The cover's got sort of like Black Sabbath, the woman on the Black Sabbath cover. They got this lone figure with this kind of like blackish, purplish hue to it. In the original drawing, he's got Cop Killer tattooed on his chest, and they used a computer to change that to body count. So that's on the streaming version. That's on the version that you can buy in stores. But yeah, the original version with the original cover art and Cop Killer are no longer available.
Yeah, Cop Killer not there. Wow.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So Body Count shipped around 300,000 copies, charted lower and sold slower than OG original Gangster. By the way, is Ice-T the guy we can credit for OG? He's the guy who originally.
Yeah, he is.
I said that to one of my coworkers the other day. Go, listen, man, OG. You know where that came from? Ice-T. I knew that from reading your book. So there you go.
Yeah. I don't know.
I think you mentioned it in your book. He's the original. Yeah.
It definitely popularized that term in American vernacular, which is amazing.
That's cool. But yeah, many rap fans and metalheads, even on the cutting edge of extreme music, didn't know what to make of Body Count at the time. But here we are over 30 years later. How is this album viewed by critics and by music fans?
I think it's gotten more acclaimed. They're playing their biggest shows to date now. There was a period when they looked like they were kind of over. They lost 3 members of the band. Beatmaster V had leukemia. Mooseman was killed in a drive-by shooting, and D-Roc the Executioner died of lymphoma.
He's the guy who's on rhythm guitar?
Yes, on rhythm guitar. Yeah. There was a while where they were kind of going through lineup changes and sporadically music every 10 years or so, and they seemed kind of finished. But then they formed, and they had Talk Shit Get Shot, which was probably their biggest commercial hit yet, and then they are a kind of a big festival circuit band. They won a Grammy on their last record, which is just like astonishing for a band that was considered such outlaws for such a long time. And recently, Rolling Stone did the 100 Greatest Metal Records, and Body Count was on it. And I think that in hindsight, people see how different that record was and how much it changed things, and how people have sort of imitated that sound. And now there's on the new record, they did a song with Power Trip, this kind of powerful new band that sounds like it could be Body Count or a Power Trip song, and they've got they're whole new bands that sound like that style. But still, Ice-T in the book says that first record is always going to be the classic. Like there's always everybody wants that one album that will be the one you're remembered for, and wherever we do that record's going to be the classic. And I think that that's true, even though a lot of people, especially musicians, were like, Body Count's back and they're better than ever now. And I hear that. I can intellectually hear how the new records are awesome. And I see that argument that they're the best records and that they've got this killer new band and this, sort of modernized metal sound to it. But yeah, that first record is so original and broke so much ground. And admittedly, that was also the one I heard when I was 15. So I have that emotional connection to it from.
Oh, yeah. The studies always say anything between 13 and 19, your teen years, 19, 20 Absolutely. Years old, you connect with it more so than any other time in your life.
Totally. And I hear the greatness of the new records, and I can see those arguments, but I think a lot about, there's that Chuck Klosterman quote in Fargo Rock City about how much he loves Radiohead. And then at one point says, but you know what? I'm never going to love Radiohead as much as Motley Crue because I'll never be 15 again. And he's like, I can intellectually tell you why I love Radiohead, but they're not an extension of my life the way that Motley Crue is. And I think that part of why Body Count is such a huge critical part of my life is that I did hear it in those terrible years. And it was that's a very real phenomenon.
Sure. Sure. But going back to, from a critical standpoint, I think of Paul's Boutique when I think of Body Count's first album, ahead of its time, trendsetter. To me, like Beastie Boys, I know everybody loves that first album. I know so many people that do, but to me, Paul's Boutique is like their first album. That's when the real Beasties, you see them experimenting and doing the things they wanted to do more so than ever. And I think that's Body Count similar.
Definitely. Yeah, they're both, Paul's Boutique and Body Count are both so different and so unlike anything that came before that. And it took some time for the world to catch up for that. So many people I interviewed about Body Count were like, who else is doing this? Like, this is, nobody else sounds like that. Nobody else writes like that. Nobody else is, there's a subgenre of rap called horrorcore, which is like the sort of usual rap themes with sort of a horror movie setting to them with horror scenarios. And Body Count is sort of pioneering that in rock music, right? And they've got that sort of, before Body Count, there are metal bands that punks like, right? Like Slayer. There are punk bands that metalheads like Discharge. But you would never say like, oh yeah, Slayer's a punk band, right? They've got some punk influences, but they're not. But that Body Count record, you could call a punk record or a metal record. It's so, that blend is so seamless. And talk to Jello Biafra and he's like, people called it metal, but I thought it was more of a punk record. And just other people like, yeah, it felt like straight up metal to me. It's this kind of genre-defying thing that was so unique and ahead of its time. And it's funny they mentioned Paul's Boutique too, because I guess that's Body Count's first record, but he had Ice-T, who's already successful. And there was that kind of established Ice-T sound and established like Beastie Boys' License to Ill sound. And then this new thing that's completely different comes out and people are like, huh?
Yeah.
Like Shadrach? What's that, right? And it's just and
that's
then
ballsy too for Beasties and for Ice-T. It takes some guts.
Right? Yeah. But then it takes some time and they end up appreciating it for sure.
We have to talk about how Ice-T, he goes on to do a lot of acting, a lot of roles. Then he really lands the role that's made him one of the most recognizable faces around. And that's his roles in Law & Order Special Victims Unit. Mm-hmm. He's now the longest running black actor in TV history, according to your book. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ernie C is quoted in the book saying, quote, "Your grandmothers know him." People see the videos and the comments are like, isn't that the guy from Law & Order?
Yeah.
So how has playing a policeman affected or influenced his music, in your opinion? Here's a guy who wrote a song called Cop Killer, and now he's playing a policeman.
I wonder if there is some sort of trolling element to it, like when he was a policeman on the cover of Rolling Stone, if there is some sort of trolling element thing to it. But he early on in his career, when he's popular at Warner Brothers, he gets some acting roles. He plays a policeman in New Jack City, and he has to say, look, people know that I'm not a policeman. Doesn't mean I like the police. I'm still Ice-T. And he says kind of presciently, he says, I'm playing the policeman I wish more policemen were like, right? This is who I like to be. But he also says, look, if I played a rapper or a gangster, people wouldn't know I could act. And when they see me as a policeman, they're going to give me some more parts because I'm thinking for the long run. And then and now you see later, this is what he's most famous for, is for playing a policeman. And there's also, it also has kind of a connection to his music in that he describes Body Count, like I was saying, as hardcore. And, there's got an interview with Henry Rollins where he says, to me, hardcore is doing what you want to do, right? And if I want to be a kangaroo and tank girl, that's hardcore, right? If I want to, do my music, that's hardcore. My Body Count, that's hardcore. And, I got some advice he had for young people who like metal. He's like, fuck what other people think of you and not that's, do the thing that you, and I think his authenticity, both as an actor and a musician, sort of makes that, he's sort of like DJF attitude that he has to playing a cop that he brings to Body Count as part of what makes him, national treasure he's become now. And now he's doing ads for Cheerios and for car insurance. And he's, Max from Sepultura said, he's an American treasure. And that kind of crossover appeal is part of that.
But we should know too that there's the irony there that he ends up playing a policeman, and there's a song Cop Killer. But I was watching his appearance on Arsenio at that time in '92. Just to clarify, he was talking about the cops that are just bad people. There were certain cops, because he would say, he goes, I've got friends who are police officers, and they're awesome, they're great, and they do a great job, and there's plenty of them. But there are some cops that are not. He was trying to make that point in Arsenio.
Oh yeah, he was, and he constantly said, for the good police, I got nothing but respect for them. I want to be a cop. He doesn't say I'm not playing a cop because all cops are bad, right? He says I want to play the cop that I wish more cops were like. And another thing actually that did not go, that I had to take out of the book, unfortunately, was I spoke with Ron DeLorde, who's the police union boss, who really led the fight to take down Cop Killer, who led the fight to get that song taken off the record. And I asked him about Ice-T now as a policeman on TV. That's ironic, but he also said, you know what? I don't, and this is the guy who really led the fight. You know, the Time Warner shareholders meeting, you know, the boycotts, the protests. This is the guy who kind of spearheaded this. And he said, you know, I don't think that what Ice-T did with Cop Killer was worth canceling him over. You know, he said, look, he's not a pedophile, he's not a murderer or anything like that. And I think that you can watch Ice-T on Law and Order and respect that he's a good actor and not be bothered by Cop Killer, which he's still like, I mean, he's like, yeah, that song needed to go. He's not changed his mind about that. But you really get a glimpse into how Ice-T could be the Ice-T of body count Cop Killer fame and also still be this huge crossover star as a policeman on Law and Order.
So to finish out, for those who've never heard this album or haven't listened to it in a while, why should they give it a listen today?
It's a historically important album. It's a musically important album. It's an innovative album. You know, that blend of styles, the chemistry, the story behind it. You know, I mean, it just like going through what these guys went through together in high school and just like, you know, as a band and working so hard and hustling on the bus and people saying like, you know, Beatmaster V is not a good enough drummer for you, and him kind of like stepping up his game to do that. And it just so much went into it. It's still a very provocative record. You know, time has not really done anything to weaken it. It doesn't sound, you know, some of that stuff is like, you know, okay, other people came along and did this better. You can't really say that about Body Count. It's still a very fiery, you know, subversive record. It's very funny. It's very scary. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It's got kind of
so true. There's humor. Yeah.
There's a lot of humor. You know, Ice-T has constantly said that's one of the most important things is the humor. It's funny. It's still shocking. It's catchy. The musicianship is great. At one point in the book, I say it's like a brick through America's suburbs. It's like a voice from some people who felt voiceless. And, you know, Ernie says, you know, that song is for people who have been through something to shout, for these voiceless people to shout, you know, yes, Cop Killer. Yes, there goes the neighborhood. It's such a great kind of breakthrough of those messages, of those themes, and of that humor, and of that sort of tension, the scariness of the sort of horror scenarios on the record, and the musicianship. It's such a great, you know, yes, you made it, you crossed over to the world, and this record, you know, has spoken to so many people, and I think it's such a powerful statement overall as an album.
I think you said it best. We'll finish with this. It's like you say of the song, when Body Count's in the house, it's both a party and a home invasion, depending on the listener. So they can decide what it is they think it is. Yeah. So the book is out now. Body Count, part of the 33 1/3 series, out through Bloomsbury Academic. And you can find it wherever books are sold. And where can people find you online?
My Twitter is Apatoff, Bapatoff.
X. It's now X.
Oh yeah, X. That's right. It's X now. Yeah,
that's right.
So X on that. Instagram, I'm still Metallica Book, which is where I started as. Maybe I'll change that someday, but I still post my Body Count stuff, and yeah, by all means, connect. I do all that stuff.
Yeah, I'll put the links to those social media sites on the show notes page. Ben, thanks so much, man. This was great.
Always a pleasure, Eric. Really appreciate it.
That's it. It's in the books.